In her 2021 article, Throwaway History, Towards a Historiography of Ephemera, scholar Ann Gardner discusses John Johnson, a devoted collector of items intended to be discarded, including bus tickets, campaign pamphlets. Johnson recognized that scholarly institutions considered his expansive collection of ephemera to be worthless. Indeed, it wasn't until 1968, after his death, the Oxford University's Bodleian Library acquired the collection, having grasped the item's potential value to historians and other researchers. Hence, the example of Johnson serves to... So they thought his junk, his throwaway stuff, was just that, worthless junk. It turned out to be worth something. So hence the example of Johnson serves to show the value of the junk, so to speak, something to that effect. Let's say, serves to demonstrate the difficulties faced by, no, not difficulties here. That's not it. Serves to represent the challenge of incorporating examples of ephemera into the collections of libraries. No, this does not talk about that either. Nothing about the library and integrating it. Lend support to arguments by historians and other researchers who continue to assert ephemera holds no value. No, that's the opposite. They actually had value. So illustrate both the relatively low scholarly regard in which ephemera was once held and the later recognition of ephemera's possible utility. That's it. That's our answer. Okay, what logically completes the text? Some businesses believe that when employees are interrupted while doing their work, they experience a decrease in energy and productivity. However, so maybe they don't always decrease energy and productivity with interruption. A team led by such and such who studies management has found that interruptions by colleagues can have a social component that increases employees' sense of belonging, resulting in greater job satisfaction that benefits employees and employers. Therefore, businesses should recognize that taking time off or interruptions are good. Interruptions may be helpful and improve productivity, improve goodwill among employees. So therefore, business should recognize that the interpersonal benefits of some interruptions in the workplace may offset the perceived negative effects. That looks pretty good. I think that's going to be right because the negatives were perceived, right? It didn't actually say it reduced energy and productivity, but most believe that. And the result actually did show that it can have a social component that actually increases employees' sense of belonging. So A looks good. Let's just check B, C, and D. In order to maximize productivity, employers should be willing to interrupt employees frequently during the day. That's silly. Why would you interrupt them? And maximize? How do we know if you're maximizing or not? Most employees avoid interrupting colleagues because they don't appreciate being interrupted themselves. That's not at all the idea in the text here, not what we would put in. In order to cultivate an ideal work environment, well, who's to say an ideal work environment? Nothing in this talks about ideal workplace environments. This is going to be wrong. Interruptions of work should be discouraged. No, the idea is that maybe they should be encouraged a little bit at least. A is the right answer. The interpersonal benefits of interruptions may offset perceived negative effects. Scholars have noticed that F. Scott Fitzgerald's writings were likely influenced in part by his marriage to Zelda Fitzgerald, but many don't recognize Zelda as a writer in her own right. Indeed, Zelda authored several works herself, such as Save Me the Waltz and numerous short stories. So Zelda, F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife, actually was an author in her own right. She wrote a novel, she wrote short stories, and she didn't just help F. Scott Fitzgerald in his writing. Thus, those who primarily view Zelda as an inspiration for F. Scott's writings miss the point. Or, more accurately, underestimate her abilities and skills as a writer. That's probably more to the text of what it's going to say. So, those who primarily view Zelda as an inspiration for F. Scott overlook the many other factors that motivated. We're not talking about the other factors that motivated F. Scott Fitzgerald. Risk misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contributions to literature. That's true. I mean, it missed the idea that she had other stories and her own contributions, not just support for F. Scott. So that looks pretty good. I'm going to hold on to that as we go to C and D. May draw inaccurate conclusions about how F. Scott and Zelda viewed each other's work. Well, we know nothing about how they viewed each other's work. That's not the idea here. The idea here is that Zelda was a writer in her own right. Tend to read the works of F. Scott Fitzgerald and Zelda in an overly... Oh, no, how do I know how people read their works? B is the right answer. They risk misrepresenting the full range of Zelda's contribution. She had her own books and stories. All right, logically completes the text. Let's read what we have here. Songbirds learn to respond to and imitate their species' songs from an early age. With each generation, small differences are introduced that result in distinct variations called dialects among geographically isolated populations of the same species. A research study examined whether 12-day-old flycatchers, I assume that's a songbird, nestlings prefer local dialects over the unfamiliar dialects of non-local populations. Okay, we can get more explanation. The more begging calls the nestlings made in response to a song, the stronger their preference. So the researchers found that nestlings produced more beggings calls. So the more beggings, the stronger their preference. Okay, so the more they're begged for. So the research found that nestlings produced more begging calls in response to their own dialect than to non-local dialects. So they speak their own dialect. That would make sense. Since song preference plays a role in songbird mate selection, the findings suggest that, well, if it's about the mate selection, it ultimately means they're going to become different species. So if that causes mating only among that group and eventually you don't mate with the other groups, you break out different species of songbirds. So that the nestling's preference for their own dialect likely disappears as they mature to promote. We know nothing about what happens when they mature. That's not the idea. That nestlings who show an early preference for their own dialect are likely to receive more food from their caretakers. No, we have no idea whether they get more food or not. That's a strange comparison. C, nestlings' preference for their own dialect likely drives them when they mature to produce with other birds from local rather than non-local populations. It says that. I mean, I might have taken a step too far to say they're going to be a different species over time, but that is literally what it says. So I think C is going to be our answer. Let's check D. The species of bird, whatever it is, show a preference for both local dialects and the songs of other local songbirds over the songs of... It didn't say that. That's not what was even in the text. C is the correct answer. In a study of the mechanisms underlying associative memory, what's associative? The ability to learn and remember connections between inherently unrelated things. Okay, so you associate one thing with another thing. Neuroscientists such and such and others presented mice with memory tests. The team discovered that fan cells, a type of cell found in the medial temporal lobe of the brain, are necessary for the acquisition of new associative memories. Okay? They also found that fan cell activity requires dopamine, a chemical the brain produces in response to pleasure and rewards. Consequently, receiving a reward should likely help to improve memory. So it makes you feel better, but it also improves memory, I would say. Let's see what the answer. To decrease an individual's capacity to utilize dopamine, receiving a reward should no, not at all. Increase an individual's capacity to recognize differences between unrelated things. Yeah, that is associative memory. That's kind of the definition they gave us. So B is going to be our answer. It helps improve their associative memory, essentially. Let's just check C and D. Increase an individual's capacity to form associative memories. Oh, wait a second. To recognize differences between unrelated things. That's not the same thing. I take that back. To recognize differences between unrelated things. No, it's the associative memory is finding connections between unrelated things. So these are not the same. Therefore, B is wrong. I thought it read the same way, but it doesn't. And we can see that clearly. Once you read C, you realize, C is really spot on. So if you get a reward, your dopamine increases, which means you probably also can improve your associative memory. C is correct and more clearly stated. D, decrease an individual's capacity. No, that's nothing to do with that. That's not even in the text. C is the correct answer.